Welcome to Season 5, Episode 8 of Solarpunk Presents, in which I talk to Star Ngei, a hacker and technologist who specializes in tech in the Global South and works for the NGO Global Innovation Gathering. And before we get into it, don't forget, we need your support, so join our Patreon, subscribe to our YouTube channel, click like, and give us a review, if you can, of our podcast. Welcome, Star. Thank you so much for talking to me. I'm really excited to hear about what you have to say about tech and the Global South. Can we start by having you introduce yourself a little bit to everyone listening?
Hi everyone, I'm Star. I'm from Kenya, but currently living in Poland. I am a maker, hacker, general tech enthusiast, and my general day-to-day work is making props for films. So it's using my making skills to make some props for films. But also I do a lot of education related to Global South technology. And I do a lot of projects that do with that because I'm a big component of Global South technology and inclusion of Global South in the Global North.
Before I ask you about that second part, let me ask you about the first part, making props for movies. I have so many questions. How do you make the props? What kind of movies?
Mostly locally here. And it's just taking things together and making it like mostly animatronics kind of props. So I do mostly the electricals and the automations.
Oh, okay. I love how you say, oh, just animatronics. Like, that's so easy. Anyone could do that. Wow.
Well, I think if you have the interest and willingness to learn, you can do it. It's just, it's one of those things you can learn easily.
Okay, so where did you learn how to build animatronics?
Through just networks of friends and tutorials and my basic knowledge of physics, mostly. So,
okay.
Yeah.
By physics, you mean like electricity and forces and this kind of stuff? Or
yeah, because it's important, you need to know. You don't want to electrocute someone accidentally or have something fall on someone, so you need to know all these things. So,
you're making big animatronics.
Depends on the project.
Just one last quick question. What kind of movies are these for?
Like I said, mostly like locally produced films. So there've been all kinds of movies, basically, and theaters also contract us to make props for them.
Oh, wow. Sounds like there's a vibrant scene there is this in Warsaw?
In Poland in general, yeah. I'm in Warsaw. And so there is a vibrant filmmaking scene, and they do a lot of local shows and films. It's interesting work.
I'll have to ask you for some links for if any of this is online, because I'm curious and I'm sure people would love to see this. But let's move on to what we're supposed to be talking about, which is the work you do with tech in the Global South. So for instance, as part of the work you do for the NGO Global Innovation Gathering.
Okay, so first I think I'll explain what the Global Innovation Gathering is, because I don't want to assume people know. It's registered as an NGO in Germany, but it's generally a network of people, communities, spaces, academics, researchers from, all around the world, mostly the Global South, because they saw that there is this need to have a way to work with tech and collaborate and cooperate. And so they decided to just make this network for people. So it's more of a network than of NGO, I would say.
Okay, so it's sort of a bottom-up way of supporting tech in the Global South.
Yes, because it started quite small and then it grew from there, and more people kept joining in, more spaces, more communities. And it's generally people who are involved in tech or tech-related things, be it software or hardware, and also research. There's a lot of people who do their research through GIG or in collaboration with GIG.
Okay, what kind of research? Tech research or social research, or what
Both,
do you mean?
like
Okay.
tech research, science, open science. There's a lot of open science projects going on in gig.
What kind of research do people do then? I mean, how does open science work? How do people get funding for tech research? Because it must be
uh,
expensive.
Well, it is. And so they tend to partner with organizations like the European Union or UNESCO or UN or World Health Organization, depending on what they're working on. So a lot of international organizations, yes, international organization provide the funding. So, for example, people who are doing research right now, there are people who are doing open science research on genomics. They get funding from UNESCO and the UN, and the European Commission actually funds a lot of research and tech in the global south and around the world. There's a whole fund for it. Any place they can get funding, they do. They could be collaborating with universities in Europe or US or wherever, and so that's how it works.
I imagine you've been involved in a lot of different projects. Is there any particular one that you could describe to me?
Personally, my personal projects that I do here in Warsaw, it's mostly education related. Like I said, there is very little awareness when it comes to technology outside of the West, so to speak. So people do not see or understand how technology works outside of the West, how the general outlook is. And so I like engaging in conversation with people and showcasing some tech or some communities and showing how they're doing things in an effort to encourage collaboration, encourage, like I said, awareness, and people to know that they can learn things from each other. And there's a lot of tech and a lot of knowledge all over the world that people are a bit blind to because of bias or just general knowledge and information, being in this Western bubble a bit.
Yeah, it is a bubble. I mean, I have to admit, I know nothing about the tech world in the global south. So what sorts of things do you communicate to people? What do you tell them about?
Well, I share details of some projects I find interesting. I hold general discussions. I do sometimes some hardware workshops just to show the concept of making, how to take one thing and use it to create something else or do another thing with it, and basically how to look at technology out of the box, which is something that a lot of the global south does, considering it's a technological black hole when it comes to tech companies and people who work in tech. They do not make products for the global south. They kind of just skip the market altogether. So you find that a lot of high tech, expensive technology is not available, not because people cannot afford it, but basically because no one is bothered to adapt it and localize it to a lot of countries in Africa. I'll talk about Africa a lot because I'm from Africa. And so people have to be inventive and innovative in and of themselves. They have to know how to modify some technologies, some equipment from previous generations, for example, medical equipment from previous generations that now they're allowed to have or they can import, and find ways to make them work. And so showing people that it is possible to modify things and working with them to do it, it actually, I find people find it very interesting, I would say, and very engaging. And that's sort of like how the conversation starts and how people decide to join projects or join gig or things like that.
So you're talking to people in
Yeah,
schools, you're talking to businesses.
mostly high school students. Yeah, mostly high school students.
Yeah, so I was just watching TV briefly last night in between the two football games. That's soccer to those of you in the good old US of A. It's like the European Championships at the moment, and my spouse is spending a lot of time shouting at the television. um, but in between, like just after the local news, there was an ad for a program they were going to show later that night, and I don't know where the fishermen were, but they were talking about how they loved old German cars because they're indestructible. And what they do is they use them to haul fishing nets in.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So instead of, they put the car up on blocks and then when you turn the axle or whatever, because you've got the
Yeah.
gas going. And so is this the sort of innovation that you're talking about, or modification of technology that you're modeling? Okay. I mean, obviously on the very low tech end of that.
Yeah, like things like that. Basically, that is a way. And that's what I mean, like looking at things outside the box, because when you see the car, you don't think fishing boats, do you? So
I definitely wouldn't think about like kicking back on the beach with, under my umbrella, watching my car haul in a fishing net full of fish. So no, I definitely would have thought that. Apparently it's a lot of people do this. A lot of fishermen do this in certain parts of the world.
so yeah,
Very clever.
yeah, exactly. And that is usually my point. Like it's very interesting and fascinating to see the way people look at this particular piece of technology and how they adapt it. I find it extremely fascinating. People are creative.
They are. And I think in the global north, we don't really give the rest of the world credit for being clever.
No, I don't think so. I don't think so. Here in the West, things are kind of done for you. If you need to do this particular thing, you will buy a tool or a special machine done exactly for that. So if you're in a place where the availability is not so much because no one is selling those there, you have to kind of make it yourself. And so that's why it is, like they say, necessity is the mother of invention. So.
Okay. And so you're supporting this kind of innovation and this kind of further development of technology in the global south. Well, obviously, because you want to make it easier for people to make their own lives better.
Yes. And also, I do think that we should have more of a global view of issues. By global, I mean global, not excluding some places, not excluding some voices. Like in a lot of Solarpunk and climate change and a lot of this movements, you find that they can tend to be a bit condescending in a way. More of a we will fix your problems instead of let's work together to fix all of our problems. So that is my focus, basically, to try and change the mindset of people.
Speaking of condescending, maybe we can talk for a little bit about something that Solarpunk is really into, but I'm not sure it fully understands, which is appropriate technology. I don't know if you've run across this term before, because it's an old term.
No.
And it was, and I'm not an expert, and as far as I understand, it was, what the term that was used before things like sustainable development, where there was this idea is that what used to be called the first world would go in and help people in what used to be called the third world by giving them the technology they deemed appropriate for them. So not too fancy, not too impractical, but also something that people thought, oh, they'll be able to keep it going, right? They don't need any fancy equipment. They don't need fancy parts or anything like that, or a fancy education or whatever to keep this going. And I can kind of see why. And so Solarpunk has adopted this idea as like, you should look at technology and decide whether or not it's appropriate for you, which is very different than being at the receiving end of someone else deciding if it's appropriate for you.
Yes, exactly. Exactly.
I don't know if Solarpunk knows that history of the term.
I think I would say, well, there's a lot of different groups when it comes to Solarpunk with people with different ideologies. But I think in general, from my perspective, because I do come from a very communities-centered perspectives, and so the appropriate technology will be what the community finds useful and how they find it useful, and how they can maybe adapt or modify, or which technologies they can make or bring or buy, whichever way they get it. But the biggest point is the community decides, which in like I was saying, right now, when it comes to the approach of the West to the global South, and even in this progressive movement, sometimes it's, hey, we think you need this, we think you need it like this, so we're going to give it to you. And they don't ask, what exactly do you need it? Is this a problem for you? And is it a problem that needs fixing? And what exactly do you need? So if you do not ask that question and just give solutions and give general ideas or technology and things like that, then there's this mismatch. I think it doesn't become really Solarpunk, in my opinion.
So what would you say to someone who is thinking, I have some free time and I have this interest in trying to make the world a more equal place? And so that means doing something that would help people in the global South. What would you say to them about how to go about doing that in a way that is good?
Well, talk to those people you want to help. Like, if you want to work with some communities, if you want to do something to help, then talk to the people who you want to help. Ask them, how can I help you? And what are the things that, we can do? That would be the best place to start. And then you build from there. Because just sitting and asking yourself, then deciding is not very much a good route to take, in my opinion.
Yeah, well, if you don't talk to people and you don't know people and you don't have a relationship with them, it is hard to know. Otherwise, you are just forcing things on people. Related to that, then what's the biggest thing you'd like the people of the global North to understand about people or about tech in the global South?
That there's a lot to learn from each other. And like I said, if you come to things without this condescending or bias that people usually have, and you allow yourself to actually look and learn, you'll find that there's a lot of things that we can teach each other. And also, people in the global South kind of want to be brought into the conversation when it comes to a lot of issues that are affecting the world. They want to be allowed to contribute. And so I would say the global North needs to acknowledge this, and to acknowledge that the world is bigger than just the Western countries, and take that into account.
What are some things you think the global South could teach the global North? What is it that we need to learn?
A lot. It's like what we were talking about previously, like how to modify, adapt, like looking at technology from a more out of the box point of view. There is a lot of technologies that have been developed in the global South that would be useful. Because I always say we had fintech before fintech became a thing, for example, in Kenya.
Christina breaking in to let you know what Star means by fintech. And she's talking about financial technology. So, being able to do online banking or transferring money, electronic bank transfers and this sort of thing. Or being able to bank on your phone. Some of which, I might add, my bank in the United States has still not figured out can happen. But also cryptocurrencies and really just anything that, just any technology that opens up banking and investment to a broader portion of the population than had access to it before through traditional means.
In Cuba, they started the hurricane research way before the Americans caught on, and
Okay, Christina breaking in for the first of several times in a row here. I've got my fact checker hat on, and I just want to give you some of the details of what Star is talking about. So, because Cuba sits across the mouth of the Gulf of Mexico, any hurricane aiming for the Gulf passes over Cuba. So despite this, and the widespread damage that these hurricanes cause, hurricanes in Cuba only kill handfuls of people, versus hundreds in neighboring countries, including the USA. And Cuba is a poor country, so it's really interesting to all sorts of agencies how Cuba manages to do this. And so part of it is because they're very good at forecasting where a hurricane's going to go, but they're also very, very good at preparing for them and also for dealing with their aftermath. So they have a lot to teach us about how to deal with hurricanes in general, and the increasingly stronger and more frequent hurricanes, typhoons, and cyclones that global warming is brewing. So in Cuba, hurricane preparedness is part of the culture, a conscious choice they made after a devastating hurricane in 1932 that killed 3,000 people. So Cubans are trained to evacuate, and they practice evacuation once a year in a mandatory drill. And the Cuban hurricane warning system reaches nearly everyone. So people are like glued to their radios and their phones for like 2 days before a hurricane. During the drills, vulnerable citizens are identified, and then people understand that they need to support them, and so they figure out how to do that in the event of a hurricane. And, hospitals are set up so that they remain open and fully powered during hurricanes, as opposed to being shut down, as they tend to be in the United States. And so this is how Cuba keeps its fatalities from hurricanes down, despite the fact that they get hammered by hurricanes all the time. And like I said, their response is the envy of almost every other country in the world that has to deal with hurricanes or typhoons or, any of these things that are hurricanes but don't happen in the North Atlantic, and so they have a different name.
But still, the West decided to ignore them, we know better than you, until a disaster happened and they had been warned of it by the Cubans.
Okay, Christina breaking in again to say that the event that Star is referring to is that in 1900, the year 1900, the Cuban government tried to warn the U.S. about a hurricane that was about to strike Galveston, Texas. But the U.S.'s National Weather Service just completely ignored the Cubans. And so 6,000 people ended up dying in the storm. And a lot of that was needless because they just weren't prepared for the storm because they didn't believe the Cuban forecast because they were arrogant.
And so that's when people realize, okay, maybe there's something here. And a lot of the hurricane research and how people look at it comes from the Cuban researchers. It was actually Jesuits who were doing it.
Christina breaking in again to say that the Jesuit Star is talking about is Father Benito Viñas, who lived from 1837 to 1893. He developed the first network of weather stations in the Caribbean, laying the groundwork for the hurricane warning systems in use today. By 1875, Father Viñas, having worked in Cuba for 5 years at that point, had learned to read the ocean swells and the movement of clouds at various different levels in the atmosphere well enough to predict oncoming hurricanes. So, in September of 1875, he issued the world's first, or at least the world's first known to history, hurricane prediction. He got so good at predicting hurricanes, he became known as Padre Huracan. So the Jesuit order, by the way, has produced many a fine earth scientist, astronomer, geographer, and cosmologist. This is in large part because of the Jesuit interest in finding God in all things, and to study the way the universe works, so as to better understand what they view as God's creation. And now back to Star.
And so things like that. See how people are doing things, try and do it yourself. And the thing people are afraid of right now when it comes to climate change or how the world is going, and a lot of people have this very much of apocalypse mindset, unfortunately. But then also, if you look at how the world is changing, how, there are now hurricanes all over, there are floods, there are droughts all over the world. And people are really scared about, how will our communities survive this? Well, a lot of global South communities have survived things like that without high tech or really specialized technology. They did these things from a community level. Like in Nepal, in a lot of places, they've already been through all this. So if you go and ask them, how did you do it? Then you can further your knowledge and prepare. And, I'm speaking more to the Solarpunk, I would say, community, because they're the ones who are trying to answer this question of, how will we survive all this? How will we move forward? How can we envision a future? I think I'm going on a tangent a bit.
No, but I can see. So I was just, in the last week, there's been a bunch of tourists who've died of, exposure to the heat on Greece because they've been doing things that no Greek person would do, like wander around in mid-afternoon, because they just don't understand what heat means, right? Yes. And so I think with okay, so I have to admit, like, I've never been frightened of the future before, but this year I have learned to be frightened of the future for the first time in my life, because I see we're going off the charts here, and it is becoming so hot in some places that more and more people were dying, right? Just like 1,000 people have just died on this pilgrimage to Mecca
That happened
every year. And this is just, and these are people who are used to living in hot places, right? So there are adaptations that we have to make that don't necessarily involve technology, but do involve remembering how we dealt with things in the past before we had air conditioning and things like that. So I can see that it's a very keen survival strategy for us to learn what we've forgotten.
Yes. Or what other people are doing.
Or what other people are still doing, yes.
What they have discovered, and how they've built upon the knowledge. So you don't have to actually just think about everything from the ground up. I would say there's a lot of people who have done very similar things. And if you just look around, open your eyes and see what's happening around you, you will learn these things.
Yeah, myself, I think, going into this future that will be hotter and with much more variable weather than we're used to having, then part of the solutions will be to develop new technology, and part of it will be to say, okay, where have we gone wrong in the way we live our lives? And, maybe we should pick back up some of these older ones. So let me ask you a question about this global
Innovation gathering.
Innovation gathering, not information gathering. How can people get involved if they're interested or otherwise support the work that GIG is doing?
Well, you can reach out to GIG because, like I said, it's a network of a lot of people from around the world. Anyone who wants to collaborate with others, who wants to do some tech-related work, or just community-based work, because the focus of Global Innovation Gathering and a lot of those projects are community-based, things that will help the community, not just, a business or an individual. So if you want to do that kind of thing, you can just contact them directly. And people can just reach out and you can ask to be invited to it. And
okay, so you've got people who provide coding skills, you've got people who provide designs, you've got people who provide actual places where people can do work, or what is it that people can actually do as part of this network?
This, like I said, when you come to this network, you kind of already have something, an idea you want or something you need to do. And the NGO helps with coordination and with funding. They don't do the providing the spaces themselves. People have to come together and do it. Right now, there's several projects that they're doing. There is one of the bigger ones is called Careables, which they're trying to make open hardware for disabled people. So things that can be made anywhere with as little specialized knowledge as possible at a very low cost. So if you're someone who's interested in such things and such technologies, you can reach out to the project and you can work with them.
Christina breaking in one last time to say the website is globalinformationgathering.org. Check it out for all the info.
On the website, there is a list of projects that are going on. If you contact the NGO and you ask them, okay, I'm interested in this kind of projects, is there anything that people are working on in this? Then they will tell you. But it's mostly self-driven by the communities themselves. And they do collaborate with each other, but you have to know what you want to do.
Okay, as someone who grew up in a very big city where, yeah, you might know your neighbors, but you didn't really know your neighbors. And it's every man for himself or herself, and you got to pull yourself up by your own bootstraps. How does a community make a decision about something?
Well, you need to know each other.
I mean, so by community, are we talking about a neighborhood? Are we talking about a town or a village, or what level are we talking about here?
It can be a neighborhood, it can be a town, it can be a group of people who have come together to do something. The very different definitions of communities that people have. let's just say a group of people with similar interests who come together, as a collective to do things. If you're in a very individualistic mindset, it's a bit difficult to imagine doing things with other people.
So I live in a settlement, which is, it's a street with 15 houses, about 45 people, and it's part of a group of settlements and two actual villages that have administratively sort of clumped together in order to to still exist, to have enough people to still exist. And we have a mayor. He lives up the street from me, and is in the grand tradition of all the mayors from our little collective, I guess you would say, a collection of our community. I personally, I think he became mayor just so that he could make sure he got planning permission for a building he wanted to build that he wasn't getting planning permission for. And anytime there's work that needs to be done, he pays himself to roll out the tractor and do the work on the street or whatever. Right. And this is so normal here, and it's infuriating. This level of corruption is so infuriating. But I sit here and I wonder, how do you fight it? We all hate it, and yet, and so I wonder, how do communities is corruption also a problem in communities that are not as individualistic? And if so, how do they deal with it? I mean, I really would love to know how to cope with this.
Well, like, if all of you came together, the mayor is just one person, isn't it? Now, if all of you came together and you decided, okay, this is what is going on, we need to do something about it. And you can start, a movement from, grassroots, ground up, and as a community, because he cannot be the mayor and leave alone. He needs this place, but you guys don't really need him, do you? And so if you just come together, find out what are the things you want as a community. What do you want? What values do you want to have? How do you want decisions to be made? What things are acceptable or not? Like, it takes a lot of talking, I would say, and a lot of communication is important. You would need to know all your neighbors.
Yeah, no, it's hard work.
And talk to them. Yeah, it is, and that's something a lot of people don't realize. It is hard work, but then I think it's worth it.
Mm-hmm. So, do you come from a big city yourself?
Yes and no. We have this sort of like joke in Kenya that you don't really come from the city. You come from where your grandparents are.
Okay.
So yeah, I don't know. It's been a long time since I was in Kenya.
Okay.
And when I talk about communities, I don't just mean like people who live in the same place. I'm also mostly thinking of groups of people that came together purposefully to do something and to build, the community themselves. It was very purposeful on their side. Like, it was very intentionally built communities. That's what I'm talking about mostly.
Yeah, and this is what you're helping people build with
Yes.
this work with GIG. Let me ask you a personal question. I mean, although I guess you've lived in Poland for a long time, but you now definitely live in a big city. And how do you find community there?
I know a lot of people here. I would say we have some kind of community together, of group of friends who do things, similar interests. I don't feel like I'm in this island of, individualism and not doing anything together. You have to find these people. Like, these people tend to find themselves. We tend to find ourselves because people have this interest. Okay, want to start a makerspace or a hackerspace, and you find like-minded people and you do it together, and that way you build a community. That is my experience when it comes to working with other people in Poland.
So locally, you found your theater people and your film people, and
and the makerspace people and the hackerspace people. It's if you're looking for it, you'll find it. That's the thing.
Okay.
There's always like a group of like-minded people who want to do things together.
And so, what do the other makers that you know? What kind of stuff do they make? Are you all doing
whatever.
animatronics?
No, people do whatever it is that interests them. Like if you are into things to do with laser cutting or carpentry or basically anything, whatever you want to make, you make it. Many makerspaces have all kinds of equipment and tools, so you just go crazy, do whatever you want.
Okay, so there's actually a space that you can go to
Oh
where you
yeah,
can do stuff.
yeah, there are. I don't know if you know the concept of makerspaces and hackerspaces.
Only abstractly, but not
Okay,
in real
so
life.
no.
So,
So like I would say hackerspace, makerspace is usually, it tends to be a building with people who come and form this some loose society, right? And they buy equipment, they hold workshops, they basically do things together. So we have several maker spaces in Warsaw. There's one, but that one is funded by Orange, like the telecommunications company, and they have a lot of equipment there. And if you want to learn how to use something, if you want to make something that you wouldn't be able to do without that equipment, you just go there and do it. And that's just the concept around these things.
so how do you get a big company like Orange to fund something like this? This, which is, almost, I mean, it's subversive on some level.
Well, a lot of lobbying. Well, but also a lot of these companies kind of want to fund such things because unfortunately there's a lot of greenwashing going on. But if they want to fund such a thing to look good, then let them fund it.
Oh, okay, so they put it in their shareholder report every year, and everyone, yeah, okay,
Yeah. Like,
yeah.
but a lot of them are made by the people themselves.
Hmm.
Having someone funding it does help a lot because these things are expensive,
You have to pay
especially
rent, and you have
you
to.
have to pay rent. But in the hacker spaces, maker spaces, people just pay membership fees. They
Mhm.
pool their money together to buy equipment. They do projects together. I would say in the US, there's a lot of hacker spaces and maker spaces
Mhm.
that do things. I think there's Noise Bridge. I think it's the best known hacker space. I know when people hear hacker, they think, it's Mr. Robot, just with a hoodie and
Yeah, yeah.
typing. And no, it's just a subversive way of looking at technology and not just software. It's a lot of electronics, hardware, and people do things, even sewing in the maker spaces, hacker spaces. It's a whole thing. And people do botany, people do, and it's just people come together to do things they're interested in.
Oh, that sounds fantastic. So you're not just being a passive consumer of things.
No, like I said, it's very intentional.
Okay, I'm
this
gonna
this
have to
kind of
learn more
things.
about this. Not that I can make anything, because I'm full of good intentions and unfinished projects, and yeah, things that look crooked.
Yeah, but I
Um,
don't think I'm explaining maker spaces and hacker spaces properly. it's it's a difficult concept to put in, to summarize and to envision.
well, I imagine they all have their own different, separate, individual, localized culture,
Yeah,
depending on the personalities involved. So does it tend to be young people, or?
all ages. It's all ages. It depends on the maker space, the hacker space. In Germany, they have a huge hacker space movement. Around the world, there is such things, and so age, gender doesn't matter.
Oh, I may have to leave my tiny little village here and find out if there's anything going on in the local big city. um, okay, let me ask you one last question. And just very roughly, since obviously we can only talk in generalizations here, but how do the people of the global south view the global north?
Oh, that is a bit of a tricky question in that I can, turn the question around and say, how do people of the global north view the people of the global south? Because a lot of this, it's all about perception, right? and what you consume in the media or what you see around. So quite ironically, also a lot of people in the global south, what they know about the global north is from movies and things like that, and books. But also people can see that they're being left behind. People can, with the internet nowadays and everyone being connected, I would say this to generalize is a bit difficult, because if you look at it from different perspectives, then things start getting a bit difficult, because we can say, how do they see them from a social perspective or a tech perspective? But yeah, it's difficult to answer that question.
Yeah, okay. I guess it's not really fair. I mean, that's a lot of different people all over the world. So
yeah, very different people, very different perspectives. And I always say, we're not this homogeneous group.
no.
Yeah. So it depends on who you're asking. The people who love the West, the people who do not like the West, who do not like Westerners at all. There are people who, it's just depends on what they know and how they know it and what they think about it.
But I guess, is there a lot of anger, especially about climate change?
Again, another difficult question
Okay.
to answer.
Well, and
No,
I guess if
it's the same concern. Like I think it's a global concern when it comes to things to do with the environment and things to do with like general political climate or social climate. It's people know the same things, right? Because right now communication is on a global level. So thoughts on climate change in the south are the same as in the north. People are worried about it. People are affected by it, right? And this is why I say there's a lot of underrepresentation of the global south when it comes to discussions about this. When it comes to ways to deal with things like this. And so I would say a big number of people who work in this technology in these areas, they want to be, represented, they want to be listened to, and they want their input to be heard. And so we're all facing the same thing. And it would be great if we work together and actually accept that just because they're from a different part of the world, or because you have this particular mindset or this particular, I would say, viewpoint that you have because of the media or because of just having very little knowledge, does not mean that things are not affecting people equally. And sometimes they're worse in a lot of places compared to others. So,
we were just thinking here about heat waves. And then you think, well, actually, most of the global south is at very low latitudes.
yeah.
And so they're really facing the brunt of that. I mean, they should be far more worried about that than, I'm sitting here in northern Germany, heat wave. Huh?
Well,
Would be a
people
nice
are
day,
worried. People are
Yeah.
worried about it.
Because I think they are, in fact, more strongly impacted by these things.
In some places, yeah. In some places, yeah. Like you saw the other day in India,
Yeah.
there was this huge heat wave, and there's a lot of flooding in Kenya during the last rainy season. There was a lot of flooding. Right now, there is a problem where people can no longer predict when to plant things or when to plant the harvest, or so agriculture is really affected. Because previously you could tell, by the time of the year or by the weather changes, that this is a good time to plant this, or this is a good time. Right now it's all over the place. It's chaos. And so people are being affected by it.
Yeah, that's terrifying, because that's hunger and famine, right? When when the crops don't grow.
Yeah, and it's also, I would say, in Poland, farmers also have the problem because right now the winters are very, very warm, and the weather is just unprecedented. So people are confused. Okay, what do we do now? And I think one place that is affected a lot is agriculture, which is a very important sector.
And the farmers are angry right now because
Everywhere, yes.
partly I think because of the stress they're having to deal with climate change and the bad crop yields because the fields are too wet or the fields are too dry, or first the fields are too dry and then they're too wet. And
Yes.
yeah, so the farmers are under a lot of pressure because of climate change, but also because of politics. They're not being paid enough. I know the Polish farmers are very angry about Ukrainian wheat flooding their market and driving the prices down. And, they were blockading the trains for a while. So it's a big mess right now. And we're not pulling together as
Yeah.
a world, really, in order to make sure that we all get fed, for starters.
Yeah, because the problems are the same everywhere. The climate does not just concentrate in it's one
Well,
place. So a lot of the grievances are quite similar.
so I don't know about the global south, but I think in the global north, we kind of think we control everything, including, everything, and they've got it all under control, and that who cares about climate change or who cares about this, whatever, because we have tech and we've developed all, we're so smart and so advanced or whatever. And I think we don't really realize how fragile the whole system is.
Yes. People don't realize that. And like I said, like you've said, the West feels like everything begins and ends in the West. But if they model a particular solution or particular technology according to the West, then, it's one size fits all. But it's not.
Yeah, it's a very bad attitude that we can dominate everything and bend it to our will. But I think we have that attitude deep in our hearts and don't realize it. So that's one thing I wish we could change about our culture, or, roughly speaking, the culture of the global north.
Yeah, people have a lot of biases, I would say, and they make a lot of assumptions, which, unfortunately impacts how they see things, how they view things. And also, unfortunately, capitalism does not help in this. The way things are just centered on shareholder value and maximizing, shareholder value, everything else falls behind, right? With such mindsets and such cultures, it's very difficult for people to come together and do something because the economic or social or political climate is not very conducive to it. It's going very much against the current culture and general social, political, economic climate, because you can decide that you'll do something as a community, that you want to do things in a local group, but at the end of the day, you have to buy things, you cannot make everything yourself, and so you have to interact with the market, with the economy, and it's a bit frustrating, I would say. It's very frustrating. It can be.
But I love this idea of the makerspaces, which kind of starts to undermine some of that, or at least dilute it a bit, taking back a bit of power away from the big corporations. And
Yeah, they try to
yeah,
suck events a bit, find the loopholes around. But I cannot generalize when it comes to makerspaces. Makerspaces, like, it's a very diverse group, spaces and people with different agendas. But I think the one thing that joins a lot of them is trying to do something differently, trying to work together to make something better, something different, or just see what they can do.
yeah, or adapt it to people's needs.
Yes.
Are there a lot of hacker spaces in Kenya?
We don't have. I know several. There's Swahili Box in Mombasa, and in Nairobi, it's mostly maker related. So mostly hardware skills and such workshops and things like that.
And do you know what kind of projects they work on?
Currently, no, I don't know what projects they're working on right now.
Okay,
I know of. I could ask around in the network. I'm sure there are people who do that.
I was just curious if it was like, building agricultural supplies, or if it was, again, adapting or building this equipment for people with disabilities
Oh,
or...
people are doing all those, not just within like a makerspace. There's a lot of projects that are working on these things, and a lot of very localized community-based projects. I know several of those, not just within gig, but also outside of it. So there's a lot of things going on, much
Okay.
more than you would think.
Yeah, I actually have no idea. And the people who do this work, are they doing it because they need something themselves? Are they doing it because they're just driven to make things? Or are they doing it because they see a need in their community? Are they just curious? I suppose all of those things.
All of those things. All of those things.
Okay, well, this gives me a bit of hope for the future, actually. So thank you very
Yeah,
much. And it's been really nice talking to you.
thank
And
you.
um,
I hope I made sense.
oh, definitely. I hope I made sense, because I definitely don't always. Um, so anyway, so yeah, so I will say thank you, and I hope we can talk again sometime.
Thank you.
And that's a wrap. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Thank you for listening to Solarpunk Presents, a podcast hosted and produced by Ariel Kroon and Christina De La Rocha.
The audio for this episode was recorded in part on the traditional territory of the neutral Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe peoples.
And in Germany. The opening and closing music for this podcast is Water Cooler Gang by Monkey Warhol, available for use under the Creative Commons Attribution 4.0 International License.
Don't forget to support us on Patreon at patreon.com/solarpunkpresents.
Every little bit helps us keep bringing you discussions and interviews.
Until the next episode, keep dreaming.
And stay solarpunk.